How I Got Here, the inside stories of startups and innovation in travel and transportation, with your hosts, PhocusWire's Kevin May and Mozio's David Litwak. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Mozio and PhocusWire's How I Got Here podcast, our weekly focus on innovators in travel and transportation. Today, we're here with Tobias Ragge, who is a managing director of HRS. HRS stands for Hotel Reservation Service and was founded in 1972 by Robert Ragge, his father, in Cologne as a travel agency for the placement of rooms during trade fairs. In 2008, his son, Tobias, took over the family business after serving several years as an executive assistant, a head of marketing, and became CEO in 2008. Since he took over, he's transformed HRS into a global company and expanded its business services. So thanks for joining us today, Tobias.
Thank you very much, David, for having me.
So we like to start every one of these off the same way, which is to ask you how you got here.
So how I got here is, as you rightfully pointed out, the company was founded nearly 50 years ago by my father. So him being also a diehard entrepreneur, you can imagine as a little boy, we had the company sitting at the breakfast table. So I early on got a glimpse of what, entrepreneurialism is about and what his business is about. And I think my first student jobs were actually working in the call center of his company doing hotel reservations when I was like 15. So I got involved in the business, went to get my MBA, work outside of the industry, and even worked then within the industry for Lufthansa at some point. Before at some point, it was actually my mom asking me if I wouldn't be interested in joining the company. And so I think I had a 5-minute conversation with my dad about joining. So it went like this. So I heard you're interested in joining. I'm like, yes, maybe. He's like, okay, when can you start? I'm like, okay, maybe tomorrow. He's like, okay, what do you want to earn? Gave him a number and said, okay, deal done, get started. Looking back now, it looks like our takeover process was working super designed, and it worked out perfectly well, which usually isn't the case, I think, when you hand over the business from first to second generation founder. But I think the fact that we haven't prepared for it and we had to rival along our way was actually the secret to success. So I basically was in the company, I would say 4 years, running different areas of responsibility. Picking up basically every project which I thought was important or nobody would seem to drive. And at some point, I took over the business and created out of what HRS was back then, which was, starting as a brick and mortar business, then became basically the first OTA in 1995. It was then later on from myself pivoted into certain different levels of activity. There's one side of our business which is OTA related, where we also did some M&A and still today are in Europe the third biggest OTA. We basically branched out from there into the enterprise space, where we built a complete end-to-end corporate lodging platform which covers all the aspects from procurement to booking to payment and expense management. And we work today probably with 35% of the Fortune 500 and are the biggest player in this space. And the third line of business was about building tech solutions for the rental vacation market. And this was created into the market leader for the German-speaking markets. A business which you can imagine right now is doing tremendously well. Whereas the business travel is struggling, but that is a good diverse balance of what the group HRS today is all about. And we have presence in now I think 35 different markets globally, and colleagues basically working on all 5 continents around the world.
Thanks, Tobias, for joining us. It's Kev here. It's good to see you again. Now, we've met and chatted a couple of times over the years, and it's this backstory that I've always found pretty interesting. I mean, can you tell us, do you have any brothers and sisters?
Yes, I do. I do have one brother, one sister, and two brothers.
So was there any, I guess, sibling rivalry for joining the company, or was it always, did you sense your path?
No, I was the oldest, so I think I was more challenged than my brothers and sisters in this regard. And you have to see also me and my sister, we're 1.5 years apart, and then my two little brothers, they're 7, 8 years apart. And since my dad was quite old when he got us, so he was 37 when I was born. Also at some point, I think his age made it difficult for the younger ones to basically take probably the seat that I was taking. And the second component is also, desire to be all in, I would say, because as you can imagine, when you take over a founder's legacy, a person who is also a strong personality, then you can only do it if you're also committing yourself 110% to that venture. And I think that's something that not everybody was sharing as an interest.
But it's interesting that the words you said there were a founder's legacy. Now, not only is it a founder's legacy, it's also your dad.
Yeah.
So that's kind of, it's almost like double pressure, or did you not see it as something that was a challenge, more of an opportunity?
No, I think it's good you asked this, because usually you tend to think that somebody is doing it because he feels he has the responsibility to do it and he's been talked into it. So my father's family was also entrepreneurs before, and he didn't want to take over his father's company. And that's when his father, I think, kicked him out when he was 18. So he was by himself growing up. And I think this experience it turned him into saying, I will never, ever force anything on my kids. They are completely free to do whatever they want to do. So he never tried to force a conversation. It was really my desire, because I saw huge potential in the business. I found it an interesting business. And I saw just much more opportunity coming there. And I said, hey, if there's an opportunity in something that's already good, but you could maybe make it better and greater, why not exploit that opportunity?
And just the last one from me for a second. I mean, I know you said it was often the subject around the breakfast table. Did you, through those overhearing of conversations, did you have a pretty good understanding of what the travel business is before you joined, or was it? And I suppose the follow up then is what is your kind of earliest age that you kind of knew how it all kind of works? Was it just from overhearing, or did you ask? Were you genuinely interested as a teenager?
Yeah, I think I was interested because, when your dad works a lot and he's not, part of the usual socializings that maybe other parents are, you're asking yourself, why is that the case, right? And you're trying to figure out, okay, what is the guy actually doing? And so I was always interested to understand it. And then I think it started really with me when I was, I think 14 or 15. I think 15, I started jobbing in the call center, to just make some pocket money. And that is when I understood what is it that we really do? How does the customer journey look like? What are they looking for, the customers? Why they are basically collaborating or working with the service my father built. And that's when I really got engaged into it to get my head around it. But I would say, Kevin, it probably wasn't before I really finished my studies that I really got commercially interested in right. How can that business be optimized and be turned into something, in the future.
Yeah, David?
Yeah, so Tobias, thanks for joining us today. Like to delve a little bit back more into your family dynamics here, and I apologize before we get back onto the business here. There's a saying, about how the first generation builds and the second generation expands, and the third generation is spends or something like that. And I'm paraphrasing here, and there, family dynamics among kind of family businesses can be delicate. And I'm curious if, how did you said your dad didn't pressure you, which I think sounds wonderful. How did he, I think how did he instill culture in you? In like some of the clues I saw was you started as an executive assistant, all right, and he didn't just name you CEO. How did he instill a culture in you to make sure that what made HRS special from the beginning wasn't lost?
So I think the expression we have in Germany is second generation maintains and the third blows it. So,
You have it too. Good.
Thank you for having the opportunity for me to expand it. But David, to come back to your real question, I think by working with my father, I realized, okay, he has two personalities. He has a family father personality, which I knew before, being his son, and he has a business personality, which I didn't know before I joined him. So, and when you work together, you obviously discuss a lot about the business, about also people, leadership. I mean, all of these things, right? And nonetheless, at the end of the day, my dad was a classical self-made man, born 1937. Yeah. A tough guy, I would call it. Yeah. He wouldn't think about mission statements or what's the personality, corporate values. He would never create any scorecards for this. I mean, it was him. He was authentic in his personality, and you could basically see it, observe things, and say, okay, that's what I think is good, and that's what I maybe would do differently, because in terms of our leadership style, I think we're very different personalities, because when I started, I was a young kid, basically having had no experience in the business world, right? The only thing I had was my capability to work with numbers and be analytical, and everything I learned before. And he was this gut entrepreneur. So you have a completely different way of dealing with things. But when you are 28 or 25, you have no gut, right? There's nothing you can call your gut because you don't have experience. So, and I think this is how I always keep saying I was tremendously blessed to work along with him, because I learned in a few years, probably 35 years of his experience of the industry, how are players behaving, how's the industry working, because things come back in a cyclical way, I think, over the years, even if tech and things change. And that was tremendously valuable for me. Leadership, I personally think, David, is something which needs to be authentic, and also in the context of you and your social upbringing, and also the time, right? And everybody knows this. I mean, our parents are 20, 30, 40 years older, different social context, right? And where we sometimes think, oh my God, this is so outdated. In their generation, that was the way things were working. So I think you need to somehow figure out the things you think they are very valuable, make a lot of sense, and then adjust it with your own way of being an authentic leader.
So, quick follow-up question on that then, before we move on to kind of more business model stuff, is do you have a mission statement and values these days, and kind of specifically what were those things that you kept from the old guard, and what did you install that was new?
Yeah, I mean, sure, we have all of these things today. Why? I mean, also just to put it in context, I mean, back then, HRS was a purely German company working in Cologne, one office location. I joined 120 people back then, all in one building, constantly exchanging with each other. Much easier for people to realize every day what was the culture, right? And the management stuff, my dad was management by walking around. Okay, now 35 countries, a few years later, with probably 40, 50 nations, very hard to to get things together if you're not trying to build some kind of a formal, more structural, I would say more modern, engineered process for this. But the values, to come back, entrepreneurialism from day one still is today. Okay, I'm always encouraging everybody take decisions, but also be accountable for what you do. Second, for us, I think being a pioneer has been from day one part of the DNA of this company. Always taking risks, going against the current, if you want, swimming against the current, and trying to do things others are not doing, because then there's an opportunity. And it doesn't matter if it's in terms of business models, if it's in terms of markets, if it's in terms of adopting technology. That's very strong. And I think what has changed over the years as an additional element of company value, if you want, is what we call today globally united. So the capability or I would say the attractiveness of the company today is it has so many different culture backgrounds, in different markets, which I think make it just a better organization to work in, and also enriches all of us, I personally think, because I'm a big believer of diversity, if you want, if you're really in a business which is global.
Very cool. So you mentioned something there about taking risk with technology and business models. So I think it's a good segue into kind of more talking about the business model. So you mentioned in your kind of brief summary at the beginning that you have vacation rental management in addition to corporate, which are, I don't think I've actually ever seen them kind of combined in one company, but that's been good diversification for you guys. So could you maybe walk us through kind of, in a little bit more in depth, the various business interests of HRS, and, specifically kind of like how you thought about expanding into the new ones that you've taken HRS into over the last 12 years of your leadership?
Right. So as I mentioned, we have three main lines of business, if you want. The founding idea over the years was an OTA business model. Hotel portal, HRS.de, hotel.de, HRS Holidays. So we built basically a transaction-based business model for the leisure, but also for the business traveler. Over the years, we pivoted it more and more towards the unmanaged business traveler because we saw higher loyalization capabilities. We saw convenience is a core driver, and not just price, competitiveness. And that was basically the founding business model when I entered the company, and it was was a big player. It was a market leader in the German-speaking market in the OTA side. Now, after I joined, and I would say probably in the year 2006, 2007, it became very apparent to me, we tried to internationalize the business, how challenging it is to really globalize an OTA business model, because you have to do tremendous amount of spending on the performance marketing and branding side. And I also have to say, we failed in it, quite frankly. I mean, we probably didn't have enough risk appetite to basically spend the money you needed to spend. And it was also a business model, as you might imagine, it was built as a family business, so it was about profitability. It was not just built about scale, right? So just grow, despite the fact you're blowing millions of dollars out of the window. It was about really, how can we get this somehow a profitable, sustainable business model? Because that was really, I think, for us, the breaking point, which we couldn't solve, because we didn't, or my dad back then didn't want to change his financing structure. And it was all self-funded. And, at some point, it is really challenging in this regard. And you also could see very early on that the dominance of Google and then the entrance of new players like meta searchers would just create a tremendous issue on the customer acquisition cost side. So the cost kept rising, and that was something which I saw as a big challenge, which is why at some point I decided, okay, we're going to basically exit the globalization of the OTA model, focus on our core strong markets, the German-speaking markets, and work with the nice margins because of the big brand awareness we had in these markets. The huge direct traffic through the brand awareness we've gained over the years, and quasi loyalization, if you want. We said, okay, let's keep that. It's a cash cow. Let's run with this and build something out of it. And this is when we, on the one hand side, did some pivots into the leisure side of things, where we said, okay, now we have all of these customers already in Germany, but we only have hotel business. So why don't we go into the rental vacation space? And we did some M&A there in this regard. Some good, some bad, I have to say. At the end of the day, nonetheless, the stuff we did was as a lump sum, I think was good. And we created, out of a few acquisitions, we created this one integrated players, which we call today destination solutions. So they provide technology like an operating system for either rental vacation homeowners, but more for the intermediary market, which you usually have in Germany, Austria, and Switzerland, where people are intermediaries sitting in these vacation destinations, administrating the content and the properties for the homeowners. And we built quite a sticky model there, and that is the second thing which we build out. So it's not so much linked to our enterprise corporate business travel thing, but more towards our initial founding idea. And the third thing, which today, or which I have to say pre-COVID was by far our biggest business, was something I started building out, I would say in the year 2010, 2011, to pivot into the enterprise space. So because, as I said, I knew that margins would decrease in the OTA business. I knew I had to build something different if I don't want to retire with 38. So basically said, okay, what do we have? We have a transaction business. We know the traveler. Let's go and pivot into maybe the enterprise space, because I saw that back then travel management companies and the GDS weren't really taking care of this business. Flights was still the big thing. There was such a fragmentation that the whole market was just evolving around dealing with big chains as part of the supply side. And I saw a niche, because I saw that it's a big market. I mean, on the enterprise side, lodging is 40% of the T&E spend. I saw really weak attachment rates between flight and hotel. I saw players, travel management companies, who were focusing on servicing rather than technology and solutions. I saw the GDS being traditionally hooked on the air side, and I said that's something we should go in. As always, when you start something, you are naive and you have no clue of what you're getting yourself into, which is good, because otherwise you wouldn't do it. So I'm sure Kevin and yourself will acknowledge this with your own stories. So I said, okay, it's not a big challenge, right? We only have to do is globalize now. We have only to understand now complete new target group, enterprises. And we need to build new solutions like procurement, payment, expense solutions. So what's the big deal? Let's go after it and do it. I mean, I'm joking. It's erroneous, as you can see. This is what we built over all these years. But we started with simply saying, okay, there's a target group we can go after. And this is where, we deployed then a lot of our past knowledge and had to build nonetheless a lot of new knowledge, because when you think about it functionally, B2B is sales, right? It's direct sales. There's something completely different. It's channel management than running an OTA where you have a lot of performance marketing knowledge. So it meant also building a complete new functional expertise as an organization.
What I'm interested in here is that, you've just reeled off what maybe between half a dozen and 10 new things, which is probably 8 more things than what HRS had done in the 30 years or so leading up to it. So I'm interested in the management style and how you had to do that, because maybe some people in the company would have been thinking, well, everything was going along okay. Oh, and here's the young lad come in and he's got all these big ideas and he wants to put us into 35 other countries or 34 other countries and do all these kind of things. I mean, how did you manage that process without perhaps some might considering, oh, here's the hot shot with all the big ideas who's been to business school? And I say that very respectfully, but you know what I mean? It's something that does come up.
No, and Kevin, I think a lot of people thought it. So let's face it. Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, the truth is, I'm now describing, you're describing all these things in the past with an ex post rationalization of why you did things. And nowadays, looking back, it sounds so logical, right? It's like you had this perfect master plan and you followed it through. And the truth is, obviously, you iterate, right? You stumble across hurdles, you move from there, you realize, oh, okay, this is what we have to build out. I would say it's an agile process, if you want. Nonetheless, sure, I had to break a lot of things because, to your point, people were saying the business is working. What are we talking about? Also, you know, I always say probably I wouldn't hire the people usually I hired 5 years ago. I wouldn't hire them today, right? Because, and why I'm saying this is because the company had to transform so much that because it was without any choice, right, to really go where we wanted to go, that not everybody is then always willing to learn that much, wants to grow that much. It's a huge challenge for a lot of people. And some people just say, no, it's too much change for me. And this was also happening when I entered the company. I mean, obviously, I started with very small baby steps, but sure, I mean, it was a big transformation. And now, how did I do it? I think I tried to lead the way in a way that I tried to, you know, use strategy and a vision in order to say why and where we should be going. But then also, I think a lot of the times my leadership style is a lot about leading by example. Okay, not just saying what people should be doing, but basically doing it myself. And when I think about building up this enterprise business, I probably have had 1,000 or more customer meetings in probably 50 countries where I was polishing the door rails myself and learned it the hard way in order to lead the transformation.
Would you say, last one from me for a moment, but you know, during that process when you were introducing all those different changes, what do you think the staff were saying about you? You know, you kind of slightly hinted at it. Do you think, and the style in which you did it, were you were you trying to be a big leader, or were you just bulldozing your way through it? What would you say what would you think their response would be about your style?
I mean, it's very hard, right, to judge about what others were thinking. I just what I probably could say is here, a colleague of mine, he said, you know, at one point he said, you know, HRS, you gotta love it or you hate it. There's nothing in between. So, and I'm pretty sure that's also then portraying myself a little bit. Yeah, you either like it, that we are going after it relentlessly and trying to do something, you know, to stand out, or you might find it's too ambitious and it's too you know, tiring, and and it's just sometimes something which is too much for you. But
okay, Dave.
So Tobias, you mentioned something interesting about how basically you guys kind of pivoted away from like leisure OTAs and you needed to spend an exorbitant amount of money. And I think this is actually a lesson that if there's only one thing that new potential startup entrepreneurs in travel take away from this podcast, it's don't think you can just start a consumer brand and kind of come in like everyone else does. But you know, because there's way too much spent by Booking.com and Expedia, of course, and we all know this if you've been in the industry for a while. But what's interesting is that I think that you're starting to see a whole new crop of players come in and start to compete in travel. So this weekend I was reading about Pinduoduo in China, which, you know, does group buying, and that they've launched a travel site, and it reminded me how Rappi in Latin America, the food delivery guys have launched Rappi Travel as well. And it almost seems kind of like you mentioned something about having a strong brand in a market in Germany, and you guys started just adding other travel features on there. It almost kind of felt like you were building a German super app for travel, within vacation rentals, with business travel, with everything. And that was almost your strategy, where you kind of leaned into the brand recognition in Germany because trying to compete to acquire new customers was too costly. I mean, would you think that's a fair characterization? And you know, overall, I'd love to hear your thoughts on kind of like the future of OTAs and travel.
Wow, that's many big questions. So first one, yes, I mean, to your point, I knew we have invested so much money also building this brand, loyalizing people. It's a natural, I think, thought for everybody who's an entrepreneur to say, okay, how can I exploit that asset further? You know, because it's such a big cost and investment you have done. And this was what's the natural thing to do, I would say. Now, branching out in something completely different is somehow risky, especially when you try to do it with your own money. We didn't basically take anybody on board to basically hedge also the risk. And when you go global, you can create maybe something which is really truly outstanding, but you can also fail outstandingly. So that is for me always the thing which is important, though, is you never start with directly say, okay, we go global, right? You operate, that's maybe when you are 500 million funded, VC-backed, top shot story from China, from the US, you say, okay, we do it directly now globally. You basically start in a home market, you test it in a few other markets, and then you go from there. And we had always the principle, follow your customers, be smart about it, the low-hanging fruits, go with your customers into these markets, because it gives you a first starting point. It's an easy entree into different hotel markets. So you can smartly build upon this. So we needed always to be a little bit smarter, or let's say more efficient in the way how to use our funds, I would say. Now, to your comment you made, David, about the analogies with some other players, I think, what I find interesting is the examples you're describing are examples where people built something which was a different edge to maybe the same problem. And I think that's also what we did. I mean, it's not like we invented a new category, right? I mean, we basically built I would say, a better solution, and then we started to build our own category of solution. But we first of all penetrated a problem, and I think that's what everybody should try, right? You go in trying to address a market, because it's very, very hard to find and establish a complete new market, right? You usually take an existing market, penetrate it with maybe a better answer for the market's problem, and then once you have entered it and you have become relevant in a certain area, then you're trying to branch out, yeah, and you're trying to then try to build your own unique thing. But this usually can only be done if you have a real understanding of the market itself, and that takes time, I would say. At least was my case.
So yeah, well, so you've added, as Kevin pointed out, you've added like 8 products, right? And what's next? I'm curious. Is there, without obviously revealing your internal super secret strategy, is there any window into kind of where you guys are planning on taking the company in the next 5 years?
Sure, there's always plans of what you should be doing, right? We always have a saying, don't talk about it, do it. And I stick with that philosophy. But right now, I think still we have to see, and I think every entrepreneur has to ask themselves today, and especially if we are operating in travel, is your business model and the solution you have, is that maybe in a world which might change going forward, is it still relevant? Is your product still relevant? First question. Is your business model still relevant? Third question is, how can you basically in a different new world differentiate yourself from the competition, from the market? I think these are all questions we all have to ask ourselves, right? And that's where I have to say, last 5-6 months have also asked these questions myself. But nonetheless, I came to the conclusion what we built, basically lodging as a service, what we call it. So a SaaS-based model for corporate lodging is actually what's needed after the crisis more than ever. It's all about how to enable a platform, how to use the data of the platform and leverage this further. And so I think a big, stronger play, which we will develop, is how to enable data and the use of data in order to generate additional values for the partners of the platform, be it the corporations, the travelers, or the hotel partners, to make it at the end a much more balanced marketplace. Because today, when I think about our marketplace, then it's still a marketplace which is very imbalanced. Yeah, when you think about it, the lodging market has 500,000 hotel properties, I would call it, of which only 25% are chains. But the 25% of the chains make 75% of the distribution in the corporate space. So there's a clear imbalance between the suppliers and the demand. And the reason for this is that the transaction costs are usually quite high to deal from a corporate buyer perspective with smaller suppliers. And there's the trust element, which through COVID will probably grow going forward, where a brand seems to have a premium versus an unbranded property. And this is where we are thinking, how can we use data in order to create for the traveler and the corporations the perfect balance based upon their own strategic, but also traveler preferences, and taking away the transaction costs of the market. Yeah, that's really something which we're getting our heads around.
So we're coming up towards the end of this episode. There's just a couple more questions from me before we wrap up. You said about 10, 15 minutes ago, there's been some good M&A and there's been some bad M&A. What would you, we don't want to dwell on all the positive stuff, but what did you learn from the bad M&A in particular? Because it's such a tricky one.
Yeah, I think the number one lesson is, Kevin, culture fit. Yeah, so if the culture doesn't connect, and we're not talking here about Siemens buying General Electric, right? We're talking about us buying other mid-sized companies who might have a good business idea, might have smart technologies, and so on. We're talking about entrepreneurial-led companies usually. So the DNA and the direction the business has to move going forward needs to be completely in sync, because otherwise you're creating too much friction. And I think that is which usually makes an M&A process successful or not.
And penultimate one from me. I mean, you
actually, Kevin, like can I quickly ask a follow-up on that? So, Tobias, so when it comes to cultural fit, I mean, you said all these are mid-tier companies and they're entrepreneurial already, right? So this is something I've thought a lot about, like, because I've ran Mozio for 9 years and we've got our fair amount of acquisition inquiries, and sometimes I look at the team that I know and I'm like, oh yeah, these guys would be cool to work with, and others I'm just like, oh man, this is going to be like pulling teeth. But usually, like, the ones who are it's like pulling teeth are the ones who are clearly not entrepreneurial. So can you be a little more granular? If you look at 4 companies, they all started and they're all entrepreneurial. What were the ones that worked and what were the ones that didn't? If they're all entrepreneurial, there must have been some other qualities, personality quirks that just didn't sync with you guys.
Yeah, I would say also consistency in the way of working. So I think discipline, being structured in the way of working, being also strategic about how to work using data, sticking to once defined routes unless we have a different set of informations and now want to basically come up with something new. So a very rational approach of operating in the business. I think that is something which I found sometimes hard, and sometimes a too opportunistic view on things and not too much of a mid to long-term strategic view on things. Yeah, that's something where I'm always looking more into the mid-long-term perspective. And if people are just opportunistically thinking about just the next quick fix, I don't think you will ever make the progress you need.
Yeah, it's funny, just adding on to that, I remember as I started formulating my own idea of what made a good entrepreneur, I kind of drill it down to 2 qualities: self-awareness and hustle. And I saw all these people in Silicon Valley who had lots of hustle but no self-awareness, and so they'd go off careening in some direction, working their ass off and not really get anywhere. And there are the people who had lots of self-awareness but no hustle. They quickly realized that their initial problem or their initial solution wasn't the right solution to the problem, but they were too lazy to like figure out a second, third, or fourth iteration. And I almost feel kind of like what you're saying is that, like, I know the types of entrepreneurs you're talking about, the ones who kind of like, they might have that hustle, but they don't have a lot of self-awareness, and it's really hard to work with them because you're kind of like, we want to sit here and think about this, and that's not part of their DNA. So.
Yeah, I think, to your point, I would totally agree with your points, David. No pain, no gain, right? So if you don't work hard enough, there's no way you will get anywhere on this planet. That is my pure belief, okay? And I think too many people think it's easy to do things. Talent doesn't bring you anywhere, I think. Their entry card to the party, but that's it, right? So.
It sounds like you've been all of these 3 in your time as the CEO, which is a leader, a manager, and an innovator. If you had to only have one of those as your epitaph, which one would you like to have? What do you think would be the most appropriate?
One or three, I'm just thinking. Most likely, probably I get the most interest out of being an innovator,
Okay.
of driving new things into markets. But that is the leader then in me, is to really the excitement when you get really these things done, right? So my personal little puzzle brain gets excited about being the innovator, but the entrepreneur in me says, if you're not a leader, you're not going to materialize it. Then then it's just not going to do the job.
Okay. And finally, I don't know your personal situation. Let's presume for a second that you do have children, and you do have children. Okay, so that's the first part of the question then. So you're getting towards retirement age, and there is, like father, like son, this opportunity for you to pass on the business again. Would you wish the business on one of your own children? And if so, what would be the one thing that you tell them to make sure they don't do?
Yeah, that is a very good question. So I have three little kids, 4 weeks, 3 years, 6 years.
Oh my goodness.
So let's assume my oldest one would be interested. That's at least another 25 years from now, I would guess. That you can consider that option. I would be 69 by then, which would be okay still. Yeah. But quite frankly, Kevin, thinking about our age today and thinking what's in 25 years from now sounds so ridiculous that I'm not going to even entertain a second of my time of this thought. I also don't have a dynastic mindset in this regard, right? That I say, oh yeah, this is my biggest dream. If in 25 years from now, the company would still be around, it will be a pretty big company, because that's the only way how you can stay around and relevant. And do my kids, who probably grow up in quite a good set of wealth and all these nice things around them, do they have the ultimate hunger and punch to be this hustler David was talking about? I doubt it, to be honest. Because I think this is the ultimate thing you need to have. You need to be able to, endure also, the hard times. And I'm not so sure if that is really what's possible, but we'll see. And if it would be the case, I would be proud as hell, and happy as hell. But hey, it's nothing that ever really comes to my mind thinking about.
Well, this will be online on PhocusWire.com on other channels for many years to come, and you can play this to them.
I was literally about to say that. You're kicking the ass for your children.
They will hold it again, but then I'm 69. Okay, good.
That was great. So thank you very much, Tobias Ragge, for joining us this week. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Kevin and David, for having me. It was a pleasure.
Okay, so you've all been listening to another episode of How I Got Here. These are Mozio and PhocusWire's weekly chats with innovators and entrepreneurs in travel and transportation. Thank you all, as always, for listening. If you're not a subscriber, you can do so on all the usual channels. It's Apple, iTunes, Spotify, Alexa, all those usual places. Give us a review. We'd like to hear your feedback. We'll be back next week with another episode. Once again, thank you, Tobias, and thanks from David and I. We'll see you next time.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for listening to How I Got Here podcast. We'll be back next week with more insight stories behind startups and innovation in travel and transportation. Check mozio.com/move for a complete write-up of the highlights of every podcast with translations into 5 languages, and get your daily dose of news on the digital travel economy by subscribing to the newsletter at PhocusWire.com. See you next week.